Howdy, folks. I'm Professor Parks, PhD, and I make content on astronomy, science skepticism, and mental health. And today, as the title would suggest, I'm going to um, take a look at the some of the websites on answers in Genesis with regards to just the broad topic of science. To answer the question whether or not uh, anything on answers of Genesis could be considered scientific. Effectively, do they uh, not exactly follow the scientific method, but at least adhere to what is commonly defined as science? First, how do you, Nimrod and Cygnus? How are you going? Um, Shadow Falcon, good evening. Now, before I get into answers in Genesis, I want to do well. How should I start this off? every every year or every semester when I teach an introduction to astronomy class, be it ASTR 103, uh, which is a general survey course, or 111, which is a survey course simply of the solar system, 113, which is a survey course of everything else. I always start off with my first lecture being, what is science? And you can find a few of those lectures on my channel. Um, there are a few of them that are different. Some of them are shorter than others, uh, but they all effectively say the same thing. There's one that actually kind of goes through a case study in terms of how science progresses in the field of using the field of exoplanets or the subfield of exoplanets. Howdy, Rome. Um, just blocked all the old, ugly people. Nice, fair. Um, Appreciate you doing that. So, so I'm not going to spend too much time on what science actually is, simply because, like I said, there are videos on it that I've done, a couple different videos on it. But I will say the main characteristics about science is that it's testable. That every claim that science makes um, is testable. Now, caveat, oops, sort of caveat to that. Not sure why I'm on Wi-Fi, but okay. I want to put a caveat to that. There are certain aspects of what would be considered science that are not in fact testable that you might argue. Thing that's in my head is string theory, for example, or the multi-universe theory. These are based on sound physical principles, but ultimately aren't testable. So I would not consider them to be true science in that way, because ultimately, again, if science runs on data, we are science should be objective, which is the second thing that is a keystone of science, in that it is not swayed or not guided by some overarching worldview, but it is guided by the data. The data is ultimately the ultimate arbiter of what our description of reality needs to be. So, general relativity driven by data, evolution driven by data, um, uh, the age of the Earth driven by data. All of these things are simply driven by data rather than some kind of worldview, be it a Christian worldview or a satanic worldview or what have you. Which leads into the third aspect of science, in that we do not, again, well, kind of restatement of the first two, is that we leave supernatural, paranormal, that sort of metaphysical, that those sorts of explanations on the side, because things like the divine, things like God, however you want to define or characterize a divine entity, that is in the realm of metaphysics. Science has nothing to say on that subject. Science can neither prove nor disprove this concept because it's not testable. The divine is not quantifiable. You can make assertions as to, oh, all right, because the universe is ordered, there must be a creator, but there is no evidence to back that up. That is simply an assertion based on our experience on this planet. If we look at any kind of ordered system, then uh, you know, then somebody essentially made it. If we look at a car, someone actually put that car to, someone had to have put that car together. They conceptualized and put that car together. I would argue that that sort of argument is fallacious, um, but not going to get really too far, or not going to go into that argument today. So, that being said, anything within the metaphysical realm cannot be used as a motivation or explanation for something within the scientific realm. So simply saying God created the universe, okay, God created the universe. I believe that, but is that a scientific view? No, it isn't. That is a metaphysical view. That is my belief that the universe was created by God as I perceive them or as I know them. And I am very open about the fact that that is a not that is simply my belief. It is not backed up by data. Therefore, it is not scientific. Also, you cannot logic your way into scientific results. So, for example, uh, Aristotle logicked his way into a lot of what is in his book, Physics. He believed, or he postulated, that the basically all things, or all earth, the element of earth, will fall and settle to the center of the universe, or the earth. He didn't exactly have evidence of this. He had evidence that rocks fall, but he did not have the evidence for the assertion that they fall because of a natural tendency for all things to fall to the center of the universe, which in that case was the earth. And as far as I know, Aristotle never did any quantifiable experiments. He didn't actually measure things. He just simply observed them qualitatively and said, oh, okay, fire goes up, earth goes down. Um, so, yes, it must be motivated by data rather than any sort of supernatural or quote unquote logical means. So even you could, I guess you could say, from an atheist point of view, if an atheist decided to say, well, logically the universe is such because of these reasons, that would also not be considered scientific, because again, unless it's driven by data, not scientific. So, um, oh, and the last thing is, and this is vital, is that science is provisional. I actually talked about it today in my 103 class. We were talking about the end of the universe, or really dark energy in specific. And I was just saying that dark energy is poorly understood at this point. It is more of a mathematical concept than it is a physical one. It is needed to explain the observations that we currently have. Again, the data is telling us one thing, and that the universe is accelerating in its expansion. And so we have developed the idea of we've brought back the idea of the cosmological constant, or dark energy, as a means of explaining or describing that accelerated expansion. The But when it comes down to it, science never proves anything. Science never actually says, all right, this is a settled question, and basically we move on to a certain extent. You know, nuances, you could always have nuances within the in a particular question, such as what is the shape of the earth. Yes, it's roughly spherical, but the shape of the Earth may change over time. I don't know. Well, you have to ask PhD Tony about that. There are questions even about the shape of the Earth that I think are still unanswered when you get into the minutia of it. So science is always provisional and can change. And so our idea that there is this dark energy, I can see two general outcomes. One, we figure out what about within the context of general relativity, what is the physical nature of the cosmological constant? Where does this negative pressure come from? Or it could all be wrong, where essentially we have a transition like we did with classical mechanics into or into general relativity, and then into something else, in the sense that general relativity may be a very great tool for describing a certain set of conditions. But once you get into, massive spatial scales, maybe it no longer is valid, in the same way that um, uh, the Newton's law of gravitation fails in large gravity wells. So, um, science is provisional. Basically, we have to be open to the idea that even our underpinnings, even the basic assumptions that we have, could in fact be wrong if data drives us into that direction. One of the things that is uh, that potentially could be could be wrong, that is fairly fundamental, is one of the things that the cosmological principle states, particularly the strong cosmological principle states, is that physics is the same anywhere in the universe, and the physics in the universe, physics in the universe, is the same for all time. And when I mean physics in the universe, I mean things like the physical constants, the speed of light, Planck's constant, so forth and so on. Maybe those can change or have changed over time. Maybe that's a way to explain what we're seeing in terms of dark energy. But that's all speculation at this point. But the point is that as a scientist, we have to be open to that possibility. We have to be open to the idea that our current understanding of scientific principles is inaccurate, particularly in certain conditions. Now, with all that being said, let's take a look at something that is tangentially related to it, that's been in the current news. I've been meaning to do a video on it, and I figured that the only way that's actually going to happen is if I just fucking do it now. So let's just do it now. That's not what I want. That one? That one. That'll work. So you may have heard in the news recently that we have found, or JWST has found, a biosignature around an exoplanet. To give you a short, brief explanation of what a biosignature is something in the atmosphere that can only be produced through a biological mechanism. So, for example, the amount of oxygen that we have in our atmosphere cannot be replicated through a geological process, as far as I'm aware of. I think oxygen can be produced geologically, but not to the extent that is in our current atmosphere. Same can be said about water vapor. These are two biosignatures, meaning that if we spectroscopically detect these, point to that planet having some sort of biosphere, and some meaning life. Alien life, or like intelligent life, no idea. But at least we would see evidence of life on another planet. So this is a very exciting. So finding these things is a priority. It's actually one of the principal goals of JWST. One of the reasons why it was built, motivations for why it was built, was to answer this particular question: do we see biosignatures around other planets? And so this paper has recently come out. This is the archive, but archive version of it, but I believe it has been well, obviously it has been accepted. I don't know into which paper. Uh, More than likely, this is in the Astrophysical Journal. Um, anyway, the archive. If you want to find this and read it yourself, it's free. You don't have to take my word for it. So there's been a lot of hay surrounding this, and a lot of, uh, in my opinion, irresponsible science communication, in the sense that people are saying that, making the claim that this is the first discovery of biosignatures in an exoplanet atmosphere. That is really, that's stretching it. And I appreciate that the authors really don't make this assertion. So, what am I talking about? What are we talking about? Well, there are two carbon based molecules which have the exciting names of dimethyl sulfide and dimethyl disulfide, or designated dimethyl sulfide is DMS, dimethyl disulfide is referred to as DMDS. So, let's start off with this. And I'm really only going to go into the abstract because I don't want to get into the weeds with this. Howdy, Victoria. Is that this sentence? Whoops. We report new independent evidence for DMS and or DMDS in the atmosphere at a 3 sigma significance with high abundance greater than 10 parts per million of at least one of the two molecules. Uh, this they claim we find that the spectrum cannot be explained by most molecules predicted for this particular exoplanet K2-18b, with the exception of these two things. I'm trying to think of, they use words like possible biosignature gas. We discussed the present findings for the possibility of biological activity on K2-18b. So the authors are telling us, they're being very honest, very open, that this is a very definite maybe. This is definitely not a detection of an absolute detection of a biomarker. And there are two main things that we need to look at. Well, let me back up a second. One of the reasons why they are leaning in this direction is that the age of the planet would be consistent with how the Earth looked like during its Hycean days, geological era, that had a certain atmospheric makeup. And so this atmosphere would contain, the Earth's atmosphere is thought to contain these two particular elements that have origins from a biological standpoint. The issue is, well, let's just refer to this paper. Let's just talk about what's in this paper. So specifically, they find these features at the 3.4 sigma level. Well, give you a little hint. 3 sigma is the baseline. What that means is that you have a certain detection, you have a certain signal. That signal has a certain error bar associated with it. Or rather, that measurement has a certain error bar associated with it. And so you are finding a detection that is essentially 3 times larger than your error bar. So imagine that you have, 0 is nothing, absolutely nothing. And your error bar is 0.5. If you measure something at 3, so that would be 2. let me back that up. Sorry. Imagine you had a 0 point, and your error bar is zero point 0.5. If you measure something to be 0.5 and your error bar is zero point 0.5, then that value could be anywhere between 0 to 1. That is a huge range. And so, from a statistical point of view, you cannot make any claims as to whether or not that is signal or if that is just random noise. Now, if you get to, let's say, I'm assuming I'm doing the math right. If you have a signal of 3 and your error bar is 0.5, that would be considered I'm probably going to mess this up, a 6 sigma event. Basically, the detection is larger than your error bars by about 6% or by 6 times. From a scientific standpoint, it is sort of canonical. We have effectively decided through experience that unless it's a 3 sigma event, you can't say anything definitive about it at all. You really can't even call it a detection. You could call it a hint, but you can't really call it a detection. So this is at the very basic point of being what we would consider an actual detection, that there is actually these elements in the atmosphere of the atmosphere of this exoplanet. So we start off with that this is tentative evidence that these gases even exist within this atmosphere. So even that would be enough to basically put this in a very tentative range. The fact that they can't distinguish between one or the other is also somewhat problematic in my opinion, which again, that would indicate to me that the spectral lines for these two particular elements are very much blended. So they don't know which one is which, essentially. They just get a detection from a blended line. That is my assumption going into it. No problem, Al. No problem. And then finally, this is a possible biosignature. Even if they detected this thing at 10 sigma, we don't know whether or not this is actually from a biological source or a geological source. There is, as far as I'm aware, when it comes to a lot of these biosignatures, there is some what we call degeneracy between whether or not it's from life, created from life, or created from a geologic process. And what I mean by degenerate is that we can't tell the difference. If you have a certain level, then you don't know where it's coming from. I think they're implying, because of the high abundance, that this indicates that this is a biosignature rather than something that is occurring from a geologic process. But the reason why I'm highlighting this is because this is science at its best, science communication at its worst, but science at its best, in that we are reporting, this group is reporting a potential find. They looked at the atmosphere of K2-18b, and they see a 3 sigma detection of two molecules, one or the other, or both, that can appear to be biosignatures, and they're letting the scientific community know. Are they doing this because they're like, oh, we've solved this problem, we have found life on a planet? No, what they are doing, and they say this, the results also highlight the need for additional experimental and theoretical work to determine accurate cross-sections of important biosignature gases and identify potential abiotic sources, geologic. So they admit in their abstract that this is this paper, the aim of this paper is to say, hey, we have this observation. Can someone tell us what it means? Can someone help us understand whether or not this is actually coming from life or not? And that's how science operates, is that the data is telling us tentatively that it is this thing. The scientists then will appeal to the community and say, hey, we need to understand this better. We need to come up with independent experiments that are more precise, more thorough, in order for us to be able to affirm whether or not this claim is real. So it is by no means a slam dunk, but that's how science progresses. That's how actual science works, is that it asks a question, it attempts to answer that question, and in a lot of cases, the first answer to that question is tentative at best. But it gives other scientists a starting point. This is now a data point that theorists or other, mainly theorists, are out there to explain. They have to come up with some sort of explanation as to where this thing comes from. So the astrobiologists need to put their heads together and be like, what sort of processes need to create this? Planetary geologists need to get together and say, all right, what are the processes that would create these elements abiotically? So it is encouraging science to progress. It is, and it's again provisional. They are basically saying, hey, this might be the case. Clive asked a very important question. So so maybe a year ago, there was in the Venusian atmosphere. Again, it was a very tentative detection that has been effectively ruled out at this point. So they have, I can't remember the exact issue, but essentially, the data is not telling them what they think they were seeing. The other thing is that that the event, these molecules could not be confirmed by other methods. So again, it might be that the molecules do exist, but right now there is not sufficient enough evidence to say that they might exist. Not even that they might exist. It's basically a null result at this point. This is, to answer your question, is this going to be another one of those? I'm not sure. I'm not certain at all. I know that been a lot of scrutiny on this to basically determine whether or not this is in fact actually a 3 sigma event. What folks are doing is looking at the process via which they are computing their errors, basically the size of their error bars, and seeing if it makes sense, seeing whether or not their description of their errors is appropriate or not. If it isn't, and they're underestimating their errors, then basically there is no detection. So we're going to have to wait and see on that one, whether or not it boils down to it. So unfortunately, Clive, this is not a, I cannot, in this case, I can definitely tell you that we have not found aliens on this. So, so yes. So again, what Nimrod put on nails this, hits it on the head. Is that science changes when new data is collected that tells us that science needs to change. Basically, that the physical principles that we have developed cannot explain this new data. And so science has to adapt to that. The Bible can't adapt to that sort of thing. The Bible has a very clear description of how the universe is created. I am going to do either a video, probably a live stream, where I talk about the Genesis account. Sorry, the Genesis accounts the two stories of the Genesis of the creation of the universe that are found in the Bible, and I will point out that they are a not really consistent with each other, and b they are not what the evidence is telling us. Um, I know this has probably been asked many, many times, but the sun was created on the fourth day. So, therefore, how is day and night defined? Because we currently define day and night by the sun. So, if the sun wasn't created on the fourth day, and light for day and night, from my understanding, was created on the first day. I gotta show my ignorance here. The first day, heaven and earth, he separated the earth from the waters above and the waters below. I can't remember if he made night and day on that day or the second day. I will look into it. Um, do I have aliens in my basement? I cannot confirm or deny that. Nor that can I confirm or deny that I actually have a basement. So sorry about that. Uh, I only just worked out what your telescope sticker says. Yes, objects in the mirror may appear to be farther than you would than they appear. So yes. So creationism cannot change. There are certain aspects of creationism that are baked into it. Therefore, that violates one of the principles, the guiding principles of science, is that science must adapt to new data. Creationism can't really do that. So let's get into that. Um, so I will say off the top, in that you might see my high IQ research. I've got, probably 6 tabs open, 7 tabs open. You're gonna see the same text, cut and paste, basically, on 7 different websites. So, from a design point of view, if I had to make if I had to make a suggestion to the folks at AIG, is just consolidate all this into a page or 2 pages. Saying the same thing over and over again on many different pages is kind of inefficient, and not, you can edit pages. So I'm not entirely certain why this is the case. But so the first sentence here is a little ironic to me. It states that science means knowledge and refers to a process by which we learn about the natural world. Now, the funny thing is, I point this out kind of in basically the first slide of my talk on what science is. Like, you have to have a starting position. So, what is science? Well, at the basic, science comes from scientitia. I think that's how you pronounce it, which is Latin for knowledge. I then go on to say this is a poor definition of what science is, because knowledge has many different forms. So it can be knowledge about the natural world. It could be, well, I mean, I get again how you want to describe the natural world, but people can have emotional knowledge. People can understand how other people feel, like empathy, compassion. That is a form of knowledge. You can have artistic expression, which again is also a form of knowledge. It is a way of interpreting what we feel, what we experience, into a graphical or textual sort of representation. So there are many different types of knowledge that are not scientific. So this is a poor definition of what science is. Then they go on to say there are 2 different kinds of science: observational and historical science. Well, let me just start off by saying that history It's not scientific. It's not even a soft science. It's not a social science. It's not science. History is history. There is the age old adage, history is written by the victors. It is very well known that historical records are biased, that for a number of different reasons, mainly for survivability. Uh, History is really written by the people who are able to write its stuff down and protect it for a really long time. The amount of knowledge out there from a historical standpoint that we have lost because it didn't survive is substantial. It's one of the reasons why folks have lamented the burning of the Library of Alexandria. There was knowledge there that was nowhere else, and we have lost it because of that fire. So the claim that history is science is ridiculous to me. It is nonsensical to me because of the fact that there is a clear and obvious bias. It is incomplete. Now, not to say this is not to say that history isn't a worthwhile field of study. I'm not saying that history should be discounted as a respectable and applicable academic endeavor, but it is not science. Historical science deals with the past. It is not directly testable or observable, so it must be interpreted according to your worldview. What was the first thing I said about science? It must be testable. So this is in direct contradiction to the definition as I've laid out of science, is that they are admitting right up front that historical science is not directly testable. This is why history is not a science. Sir Parks calls on the Trump administration to cancel history. Yes, exactly. And then it goes on to say, interpret it according to your worldview. That I think is that refutes the second point that I was making, is that science is motivated by data. It is not motivated by a worldview. It cannot be properly called science if it is motivated by a worldview. James Lyle, who I will quote later on in his book, talks about that we must interpret, not that we do, but we must interpret things that we experience from a worldview. His example is watching a magician do something. Let's say pull a rabbit out of a hat. Is that we know because of our worldview that stage magic does not exist. And so when he is pulling a rabbit out of his hat, he is not literally pulling a rabbit from nothing. We have that worldview because so therefore we understand, or at least non-children understand, that this is a trick. This is not the actual how reality actually works. The thing that he misinterprets with that is that what he calls a worldview isn't a worldview. It's an understanding of basic scientific principles. Scientific principles tell us that rabbits cannot be spontaneously generated. There is no physical underpinning to explain, or physical mechanism to explain, how a rabbit can suddenly appear in a hat on command. That's not a worldview. That is science driven by data. So again, data is not telling. There is no data that tells us what that there is a physical mechanism that happens. So that's not true. It then goes on to say the Bible is the foundation for science. Citation needed. And I would prefer that the citation not be the Bible. Non-Christians must borrow biblical ideas such as an orderly universe that obeys laws in order to do science. If naturalism were true, nature is all there is, then why would the universe have such order? Without the supernatural, there's no basis for logical orderly laws of nature. Again, science doesn't deal with the supernatural. That's metaphysics, because Supernatural things cannot be tested. And also, science isn't motivated by logic. Yes, it is. But when I talk about logic, what I'm talking about is rhetorical logic, things like fallacies and such. Is that, again, we are motivated by data. You're going to hear that a lot just because um, this is motivated by what we can observe, what we can test, what we can manipulate. We don't do this because logically it makes sense. Because to me, it logically makes sense for the universe to collapse back in and upon itself. But that's not what the data is telling us. And so I've got to put that to the side and be like, you know what? The universe would be way cooler if it would big crunch. So I'm with Penrose on the whole recurrent universe. 'Cause to me, that's logical. And I base that logic on the seasons, on various other cyclic processes that we see in the universe. So why is it that we see these cyclic processes within the universe, but the universe itself is not cyclic? So to me, that doesn't make any logical sense. The problem is that logic is flawed. All logic is flawed because it derives from a human mind, and a human mind is by nature fallible. So nothing that so logic cannot be used as a basis for science. Again, they're repeating themselves. They repeat themselves in like two paragraphs. The original form, science simply meant knowledge. Yeah, I can see that. I don't even have to scroll to see that. The denial of the supernatural limits the depth of understanding that science can have and the types of questions science can ask. So, the problem here is their insistence on the use of the word science. I would agree that the denial of supernatural event limits the depth of our understanding and the types of questions that we can ask. However, that understanding and the questions that we can ask are not scientific. Those are the realm of philosophy and theology. And I believe that both of those, contrary to what fucking Tyson says, is that philosophy is a very valid subject, academic field, and that it is essential for a progressive society because philosophy has allowed us to understand or has given us clues as to how we can form an orderly society. You know, without Rousseau, you don't have, I would argue, without Rousseau and his ideas on the social contract, we really don't have the United States, for better or for worse. So philosophy is a necessary tool. Science cannot tell you how to form a orderly society because that's not its job. That's not what it's for. That's not a knock on it. That is in no way to diminish the power of science. It's just simply not its job. And so again, if we want to ask questions like, why are we here from a philosophical standpoint? Science is never going to be able to answer that question. It can answer it on a physical level, but it can't answer from a logical level. Again, the idea of the universe is ordered, so therefore there must be a creator. That is a logical argument. That is not a scientific one. And or you could say it is a philosophical argument. It could be that you could also, say you could also, at least to me, logically state that the universe is the way it is because it is the way it is. Because physical laws are invariant, there is no way for it not to create an ordered system because physical laws are in themselves ordered and dictate how the universe is created and moves forward. I can see that as another valid argument, logical argument for why the universe looks the way it does. So simply stating that it's the Bible or nothing is the answer to that question. Do creationists reject science? The answer to that question is yes. They don't reject all of it, but they do reject some of it. They basically reject actually the underpinnings of it. For those who haven't already made up their minds before hearing us out, yeah, that's a nice get out of jail free card. You can simply say that if I have an argument that tells you that creationists reject science, you can say, "Oh well, you've already made up your mind." Funny, I have heard this same sort of thing from flat earthers. Flat earthers say that I have been indoctrinated and don't think clearly or do not think openly or critically. And so, therefore, my mind is already made up and I am not open to the idea of flat earth. So, again, flat earth and young earth creationism have parallels. Why are unicorns hollow? I couldn't answer that question. I could not. How many angels dance on the head of a pin? Which is an actual question that people that it caused a conference of clergymen to happen. Okay. Um, Not at all. Like other creationist groups, Answers in Science affirms and supports the teachings and use of scientific methodology insofar as it confirms your worldview. What do we say about flat earthers? They only accept evidence that confirms their worldview. Anything else, they reject out of hand. That either have to go through some kind of mental gymnastics to claim that this is not the case, that what we were telling you is not actually the case, that gravity doesn't exist, or what have you, or they simply say that the evidence is not evidence. And that is mainly what the creationists is saying, is that they make Witsit type blanket statements that we do not have evidence for evolution. We do not have evidence for the geological age of the earth. That is a flat out lie. That is incorrect. And again, that is not just incorrect. That information is readily available. And so that is a lie. The truth would be there is stated evidence that we do not agree with. To say that there is no evidence is a lie. It's simply evidence you don't want to accept, which is a very different thing. Science producing life, the chemical origin of life remains the holy grail of evolutionists seeking to explain how life randomly emerged. One, you are making an assumption that evolutionists believe that life is created randomly. I would argue that is not the case. I'm not a biologist. I'm not an evolutionist, but I would not say that a star was formed randomly. I would say that a star was formed from a pocket of denser material within within a molecular cloud, and gravity, did its thing in an orderly way. That protostars form in an orderly way. Two protostars form using the same mechanisms. Therefore, that is ordered. It is not random. Now, you may make the argument that, oh, those densities within the molecular cloud, that's random. No, it may appear random because we don't understand, we don't have a complete knowledge of all of the variables within that system. If we had a more complete understanding of how the variables or what variables there are, or what phenomenon are acting when that cloud was first formed, then you'll find that it's not random. Again, it follows physical laws that dictate where that density pocket would form, and then how it would evolve over time. So, making the claim that life randomly emerged is not what science is saying. It's misrepresenting what the scientific community is currently saying. Who else do we know that does that same thing? Flat earthers. They will simply misrepresent what the globe model has to say. The problem with this statement also is, or what leads to this, is that despite the last statement is despite often sensationalized headlines to the contrary, nothing in biology has ever observed to do this. Now, again, headlines. This is science communication. I have been on the record many times as saying science communication currently sucks. It is sensationalized. They want to drive clicks. That's the whole point. That's their bias. That is what science communicators, that's their bias. That's their worldview, is that I've got to make this sexy. I've got to make this information, um, you know, more intriguing, more compelling so that people will actually get onto the site and read the article. It may not be true, or it may be a misrepresentation of the facts, and it often is, but that is not science. I do not go to CNN to learn science. I do not go to MSNBC to learn science. I go there to learn the news. If I happen to see something that is, biosignatures, for example, I know to take that with a huge shaker of salt, an ocean's worth of salt, and actually go find the paper and read it myself. Um, Advanced degrees in clickbait. Yeah. If there are aliens, I would postulate that if were aliens, they would be feline in form, because felines are the bestest of forms. They are far superior to anything else on this earth. So this idea of going to headlines as a metric of what the scientific community has to say is a poor one. And if that is where you are getting your ideas of what the scientific community has to say, then you really need to rethink where you're getting your information. And then the next thing is, nothing in biology has ever observed out of the creation, basically abiogenesis. Biologists still have yet to find evidence that life has been created from base non-living molecules, if you want to describe it that way. Life from lifelessness. If you know where that quote comes from, you and I have your geek card is confirmed in my book. Who else do we know that forms the same argument? Because you can't describe, because your science cannot answer this question, your science is bullshit. That would be flat Earth. Flat Earth cannot, or we can't, so because we cannot, we do not definitively know what dark matter is, therefore all of cosmology is crap. Wits it. That is not how science works. That is not how reality works. Is that science, by its very nature, is never going to be able to explain everything. Science is always going to lead to more questions. They may be extremely nuanced and only important to a few people on the planet, such as the exact shape of the Earth down to the micron. But there are still questions that can be asked. So this idea that science must have the answer to everything, and if it doesn't, everything is wrong, is not a valid argument. And who do we know that does this? Flat earthers. Again, young earth creationists and flat earthers have far more in common in terms of their arguments than they want to admit. Which is why they actually deal with flat earth in their answer within Answers of Genesis, which is funny because if you go to I think if you go to NASA, it might be mentioned somewhere. Flat earth might be mentioned one place in all of NASA. If you go to Science, the journal Science, Nature, whatever, never a mention of it. If you go to JPL, no mention of flat Earth. There's no need to mention flat Earth. So the fact that they talk about flat Earth at all is a symbol of something. Again, what is science? Go to this website. What is science? The original form of science simply meant knowledge. You're not giving me any new knowledge. So that's not science. This website is definitely not science because it's saying the same thing over and over again. Many people do not realize that science was actually developed in Christian Europe by men who assumed that God created an orderly universe. Interestingly enough, you're using the word assumed there. Freudian slip. Um, you are admitting that these people did not believe that God existed in absolute fact. They assume that God created the universe in an orderly way. Now, the issue here, and this is something that is worse here than it is in flat Earth, is that flat earthers will make a statement which, on the face of it, is true, but is ultimately irrelevant to the discussion at hand. This statement is factual, or is on the face of it true. The scientific method was first postulated by Francis Bacon, and has been developed since then. As far as I know, Bacon and those others, Galileo included, they all believed in God. They all believed that God created the universe. They were all men. They were all in Europe. So, as far as I'm aware, this statement is actually correct. However, it does exclude the during the Dark Ages, the era, the contributions of the Islamic world, which were significant. If people in the Islamic world did not exist, if they were not craving knowledge of their own, and if they were not wanting to pursue things scientifically, basically science would not be the way it is now, because during the Dark Ages, Christians basically limited the information that was out there. The only piece of information that they would allow to propagate is the Bible, and they wouldn't really translate it. They also wouldn't teach people how to read. So therefore, everyone was kept in the dark. I don't know if that's where that term comes from, but that's effectively the thing. So we have Muslims to thank for the propagation of at least cosmology or astronomy. I think also medicine, because of the fact that Christians basically put a kibosh on it during that time. So they're saying that science is actually developed. Now, again, science as we currently understand it, basically the scientific method. But that is not to say that science was not done in the past. We'll get to that. Is Answers in Genesis anti-scientific? Not at all. Affirms and supports the teaching and use of the scientific method, and we believe this supports the biblical origins account of origins. That is not the case. So again, they do advocate the use of the scientific method, so long as that methodology confirms what they already believe in, confirms their worldview. If it doesn't, then they don't use the scientific method, because the scientific method is data driven. You heard it here, folks. Heard it here first. Science is data driven. So therefore, no, they do not. There is a caveat there. They do support teaching and use of scientific methodology, so long that it supports their worldview. For example, creationism, or effectively the biological aspect of creationism, doesn't hold water from a scientific point of view, or at least the large consensus of of the biological sciences, again, not a biologist, um, does not support the idea that God just made man fully formed in his own image. It certainly does not. It does not allow for a diverse genetic population to have sprung up first from two people and then from eight people after the flood. That is not genetically possible to have a genetically diverse population that aren't brain dead inbreds. That's what science is telling us. That's what the scientific method tells us. That you need, I believe, is you need at least 500 different members of a population in order for that population to progress and not stagnate and become inbred inbred morons. The British royal family, uh, kind of an example of this, is royal families. They would interbreed. They would not have. They would keep their populations to a minimum because they didn't want to share power. And as we know, there are a lot of genetic conditions within royal families that come from inbreeding. Hemophilia, I think, is the one that comes to mind. But anyway, so that's not true. So yes, Answers in Science is anti-scientific to a certain extent, so long as it agrees with the Bible. Two kinds of science. Again, repeating themselves. Why? Okay. Why can't all of this be on the same page? Operational science uses observable, repeatable experiments. Okay. Origin science basically uses relics from the past and historical records to discover the truth. Um, that is basically history. So they're renaming history to be origin science. And again, as we know, science or history is never biased, it's never wrong, and it's never contradictory at all. So obviously, definitely a good basis for scientific endeavor or stating things that are scientific fact. The Bible is our starting point for science. It is because God exists that science is possible. If you say so, um, I would say science is possible because the universe is here. That is the proximate cause. I would go so far as to say the universe is here because of God. However, I have no basis for that. I have no basis for any of that. That's just simply for me an emotional argument which leads into a logical argument. It's not, none of that is scientifically it's scientifically is not science. Think about it. Okay. The reason the universe is orderly and logical is because a logical God has imposed order on his creation. A logical God, well, that seems to be limiting. Why can't God be illogical? Um, that God is all powerful, all knowing, basically an infinite being. So why does God have to be logical? I mean, I guess you could say that God was being logical when he imposed order on his creation. But the claim of logical God is, to me, again, is telling because, again, it is not only are they subscribing to that Bible is the origin of science, they are also subscribing to a particular reading interpretation of the Bible to be science. So therefore, anyone else who uses the Bible as some kind of science textbook, but does not do so in the way that they think so, they agree with, that is also not science to them. It's because God created our minds that we are able to discover the laws of science that he created. This is touching on something I've mentioned before, which is known as the anthropic principle, or excuse me, anthropomorphic principle. Anthropomorphic principle, I think, in its strong state, is that the universe is here in order for us to understand it. In its weakest form, it states that the universe is here because we perceive it to be such, using our knowledge. The anthropological or anthropomorphic Anthrop- I think that's it. I always get this word messed up. Anthropomorphic principle is a worldview. It is not the basis for scientific endeavor. So from there, I clicked on, are we anti-science? Are we anti-science? Anyone familiar with the creation evolution debate should know that anti-creationists love to lob the accusation that creationists are anti-science or that they reject science. Evolutionists frequently label creationists flat earthers and even go so far as suggesting that consistent creationists should deny the law of gravity. Evolutionists, I have never heard anyone who believes in evolution label creationists flat earthers. I label their thinking similar to that of flat earth, but I do not claim that all creationists believe the earth is flat. Some do, but many don't. I've never heard anyone who believes in evolution or understands that evolution is our best theory for life or how life has existed over time. I've never heard any of them say that all creationists are flat earthers. So again, this is extremely telling to me that not only are they mentioning it, it's front and fucking center. And also to go so far as suggesting consistent creationists should deny the law of gravity. Again, I've never heard that put forward. I have never heard the idea that in order for creationism to exist, gravity can't. I don't see the connection there. Again, I've never heard anyone who understands or who subscribes to evolution who has made that statement. So at the risk of using a logical fallacy, this is a straw man. Man, that hurts saying. We don't say this. This is not a factual statement. So I don't know where you're getting this. What's more, these assertions are sometimes made with the implication that creationists are openly anti-science. I think I know what they're getting here is that that there is this assertion that someone who is a creationist rejects all science. I am not saying that. As I've said a couple of times in this stream, creationists do follow the scientific method insofar as the results of that method or those methods confirm their worldview. If it has nothing to say about the worldview, if it does not contra or does not conflict with their worldview, it's perfectly fine as science. You know, they are perfectly happy with the idea of cosmology or dark energy and all of that. They have no objections to that because that is not necessarily contrary to the Bible. They say that somewhere later on in another website. Again, Answers in Genesis, like other creationist groups, affirm and support the teachings and use of scientific methodology. This is already stated on another website. So again, dense. Why do you have to keep hitting this point on multiple websites? Why can't you just condense this all to one? Starting points. Most of the problem stems from different starting points of biblical. Everyone, scientist or not, must start their quests with some unproven axiom, some a priori belief on which they sort through experience and deduce other truths. This is not the case. The a priori belief, if you want to call it that, for science is the first bits of data that we collect. Our a priori, our starting point, Darwinists or anyone who is actively pursuing honest science, does not start from a worldview. They start from data. And then they might interpret that data You could make the argument that they interpret that data within a worldview. I don't, I would need a citation. Classical mechanics hadn't been fully formed when Galileo was doing his thing. So Galileo certainly didn't have Newtonian physics in mind as a worldview when he developed basically the fundamentals of kinematics. So this is not a factual statement. This is a misunderstanding. They want their people to believe that science comes from its own worldview. It does not. Also, two kinds of science also causing confusion is a simple distinction some try to make between faith and science. Answers in Genesis believes this dichotomy is an error, that some form of faith is required to believe in creationism or creation or evolution. Both creation and evolution fall under the category of historical science. They do not. We see evidence in the past, but we understand that evidence based on the biology that we can do today. The same thing with cosmology, the same thing with geology. We understand that physics operates a certain way, and there is nothing to suggest that physics does not operate, or there's nothing to suggest that physics operates differently over time. Could it? Sure. As I stated at the very beginning of this, or near the beginning of this, we have to be open to the possibilities that even our basic assumptions are wrong. Creationists don't do that because their basic assumption, by their own admission earlier on, is that the men who created science assumed a god. That assumption can never be falsified. They will never change that assumption. Science will have to if the data dictates it. So, to characterize evolution as historical science is felonious at best. I mean, it's or rather disingenuous at best. Again, who do we know that operates in that way? Is that they will make claims that science does things or operates a certain way, which it doesn't. Distinctly different from observational science and blah blah blah. Another thing that I've heard creationists say is that we cannot know how things are created because we were not there. An hour ago, I was talking to a flat earther, and he was saying that the Earth is a closed system. This is Northern Rebellion or whatever the hell his name is. And he was saying the Earth is a closed system. I said it is not. Two examples of which is that we are slowly leaking off atmosphere, and meteors are a thing. Meteors are not a thing. He's like, there is no evidence for meteors. And I was like, yes. And I showed him the Wikipedia page for the meteorite that hits a home in Alabama, fractured, and bits of it, basically shrapnel off that meteorite, actually hit a woman. It's the only recorded instance of a person being hit by a meteor in one form or another. He rejected it. How did he reject it? Show me a video. Classic. Unless you have video evidence of that thing happening, that thing didn't happen. Not that. Because I then followed up with, well, how do you explain meteor Barringer crater? And his answer was not a meteor. So it's not as if he is open to the possibility that a meteor might be the explanation. He is absolutely fucking certain no meteorites exist. Creationists are the same way. They are absolutely certain that the Earth is 6,000, 10,000 years old, that the Earth is young, or at least Answers in Genesis does. So again, when pressed as to how the Earth was created or how the Earth evolved, like the Grand Canyon, the answer is we weren't there, so we can't know. Where have I heard the similar sort of argument? We can't know what the sun is because we can't go there. We can't physically manipulate it. Therefore, it's not science. Therefore, we cannot determine the independent, dependent variables. Therefore, we can't know anything. Any assertion that we make is faith, quote unquote. This is simply just another form of that argument. Because we cannot go back in the past and manipulate or witness these things happening, therefore they did not happen. Um, that does not logically follow. I don't even think that logically follows, let alone flies scientifically, because you have to at least admit the possibility that if you have no evidence in the form of being there or seeing it, then you don't know what happened. So therefore, you can't make a positive assertion whether or not it was created, or if it was, in fact, um, uh, geology as we understand it. Howdy, Friendon. I think you are new. Not entirely certain. Mr. Farina. Oh, Professor Dave. I believe that's who you're referring to. James Tour. Just a general thought after James Tour came up in my inbox. Did James Tour email you? Um, I haven't really gone into that because not a biologist, so I really don't get bogged down into creationist arguments because I don't know enough about evolution to talk about it intelligently, or at least intelligently enough by my standards, and I don't care enough to become educated. So, oh, okay, okay. So, so yeah, there's that. Uh, Read the complete argument or article. Do creationists reject science? If there's a complete argument or a complete article saying this thing, then why does this page exist? This bugs me. I don't know why, but it bugs me. Here is two kinds of science. Why does it exist? Why does this exist? Just put it all in one place or two places. Um, Imagine a friend points at a building and asks you to tell them about it. Being the inquisitive individual you are, you immediately set out to describe the building as much detail as you can. Measure it, then who built it? Measurements alone can't tell you that part. Yes, it can. You could make an educated guess, of course, but there's really no need. After all, you have an eyewitness account. Do we though? Do we though? Um, how are the pyramids built? I don't believe we have an eyewitness account to how the pyramids were built. I don't think there is um, there is a Josephus out there, or however, Nefertiti out there who wrote down this is how the pyramids were built. So, we don't always have an eyewitness account. So, are you telling me? So, what you're telling me is that unless we have an eyewitness account, then we can't answer the question, when is it built? Who else do I know who basically tells me that I cannot know something because I cannot physically manipulate it? That science cannot tell me that I cannot use science to find or to answer a question. Who else says that? Let me think. Let me check my notes. Yeah, flat earthers. Just um observational, historical. Here we go. For example, some geologists take present day rates of radiometric decay and rock formation. Imagine those rates are always the same. Yes, because there is no indication that they wouldn't be. That is an assumption. Again, it could be wrong, but there is no data to tell us that it is. If you were going to say that radiometric dating, decay, has changed in the past, and so therefore the ages determined by radiometric dating are wrong, then you're going to have to show us why or how. And that's another thing that distinguishes creationism from science, is because there are things that we observe, such as the stratification of the Grand Canyon, fossils, so forth and so on, that indicates that the Earth is young. They are stating here that the mechanisms behind these experiments are felonious. And they're fine with that because they just go back to, well, God made it that way. That's not what science does. If you want to be scientific, then what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to develop a competing theory that states why physically the radiometric decay rate changes over time. It changes over time. It has to change over time because we live in an ordered universe, and that ordered universe follows physical laws. So you must explain through physical laws why radiometric dating has changed, or why radiometric decay has changed as a function of time. Now, some creationists out there may have actually done the work. I have never found it. Although I may be being a flat earther myself in that I've never really looked, but I have never heard anyone posit an explanation for why radiometric or how radiometric decay is a function of time. Again, we can't zip back in time to test it for accuracy. Again, because we can't go back in time, we can't know anything. Not how science works. Again, does something like that exist? You bet. This is the amazing compendium of history that isn't hard to find. Just pull out your trusty Bible. So the Bible, so there is an account of how the Grand Canyon was created in the Bible. Text Bible. No. 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 Oh, that's the Old Testament. Let's go to the New Testament. Luke. Grand Canyon. No, not seeing it. Oh, maybe Peter talked about it. Acts. No. Romans. There we go. Got to be in Romans. No. 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 Well, I guess we can't know that the how the Grand Canyon was created because we don't have an eyewitness account of it. Oh well. Trustworthy or trusty? Oh, trustworthy. Trusty Bible. Oh, trustworthy source. No. From a historical point of view, there are many academic papers demonstrating that the historicity of the Bible is incorrect. That the Bible will state certain things, historical events such as the census of Herod, that did not occur when it says it did. So I think also the exile to Babylon didn't exist or did not happen at the time that it states that it existed in the Bible. Again, I will have if people challenge me on this, I will have to dig a little deeper to find these sources to back them to give them citations to this. But it is my understanding that there is a number of papers, number of pieces of historical science, of origin science, that refute the statement that the Bible is a trustworthy source in terms of historical accuracy. Starting from the Bible given to us by the creator of all things, we know when we're on the right, we know when we're on the right track. Um, and no creature is hidden. Oh, yep. Rusty Bible verses, which are taken, which may or may not be taken completely out of context. Um, and their hearts this is a verse that seems to have been mid-sentence, starts mid-sentence, that their hearts may be encouraged, being knit together in love, to reach all the riches of full assurance of understanding and knowledge of God's mystery, which in Christ, in whom are hidden all the treasures of knowledge and wisdom. Which, you know what? Honestly, if it's not, of the list of questions that I've got for the big dude upstairs when I kick it, if dark energy hasn't been answered, you bet that I'm gonna be like, yo, when you got time, what's up with dark energy? Is it just a cosmological constant, or what's up with dark energy? That's gonna be near the top because I'm a geek. Um, that and why platypus? Were you just having a weird day, or what? Why platypus? So, um, yeah, okay. That doesn't say anything other than what was it? When we put our faith in God and Christ, we uh, will eventually reach a full understanding of all things. Great. Yes, I agree with that. I don't agree with that from a scientific point of view. That's not science. I do agree with it, but I don't believe it is a scientific thing. Does science need God? No. Could science operate again? Um, in my opinion, well, God exists, so therefore that's an irrelevant question. But again, not scientific. Dr. Jason Lyle shows that even atheist scientists unwittingly depend on a God they don't believe in. Okay. This is hubris. Now, this is one of the reasons why these folks trigger the fuck out of me, is because the Bible has some clear things to say about pride. And, pride goeth before the fall, and hubris, that we should keep ourselves humble, that we should be servants to our friends and neighbors and even our enemies. Um, so, to make this claim that atheist scientists unwittingly depend upon a God they don't believe in is a fairly arrogant one. The Basin article, which I didn't look into, made the statement: the Bible provides the only possible presupposition for all thought and science. The ancient Greeks, with no knowledge of the Bible, determined that the Earth is a sphere with a radius of about 6,000 kilometers, rather than a two-dimensional circle with no dimensions given. Flat Earth. The Greeks also used. I don't think. Okay, so I don't know what's going on with it. I think this is all a quotation from Jason Lyle. Anyway, except for the quotation bit. Anyway, the Greeks also used scientific methods to correctly determine the approximate diameter of the moon and estimate its distance from the Earth to a high degree of accuracy, while the ancient Hebrews, with their scripture, achieve essentially nothing in astronomy. Interesting. Um, Hebrews, with their scripture, couldn't answer any questions. This is why I'm a little confused as to what is actually being quoted. The Greeks, also concluding that the sun was much larger than the Earth, were able to hypothesize the Earth orbited the much larger sun. The Greeks also devised a means to determine the distance of the sun that failed only because the instruments of the day lacked the capability of measuring very small angles. Clearly, human reasoning proved far more valuable than divine revelation in the realm of astronomy to the ancients. First off, the Greeks did not conclude that the sun was larger than the Earth. A Greek concluded that, probably a few Greeks concluded it, but the Greeks as a whole did not conclude that. They sure as shit did not conclude that the Earth orbited a much larger sun. No, no, uh, no. Again, checking notes. No, no. Uh, I cannot. No, that's factually not correct. Um, a Greek was it a yeah again a Greek. I think it's the same one, maybe another one. Put forward the idea that the Earth orbited around the sun, and what happened? The Greeks kicked him out of Athens. Aristarchus of Samos was exiled for putting forth the notion that the Earth is going around the sun. Um, and they devised a means to determine the distance of the sun that failed only because the instruments of the day lacked the capability of measuring very small angles. Um, not, I don't know exactly what they're talking about, but oddly enough, that was the reason why they did not conclude as a whole uh, the scientific consensus of the Greeks that the Earth orbited a much larger sun because they could not measure parallax. But let's go back a second, and I'm going to be that dude. Um, Professor Sparks, may I recommend Three Blue, One Brown together with Terence Tao that show how the historical distance ladder of cosmological distances evolved? Okay, yeah. I've heard of Terence Tao. Someone else recommended that to me. Recommended him to me. I haven't gone back and actually looked it up. I looked further into that. Terence Tao, cosmic cosmic distance ladder. I'm going to be that guy and say that the Greeks, Aristophanes did not use science to determine the radius of the Earth. He used geometry. He used math. And yeah, I know I'm probably going to irritate Clive with this, but math is not science. It is a extremely valuable tool that science utilizes, but math is not science. So again, this whoever's writing this statement is wrong. The Greeks did not use a scientific method because the scientific method didn't come until the mid 1500s in its earliest form. So, no, or whenever Bacon was around, or arguably Galileo. Galileo did definitely do scientific experiments. I don't know if he used the strict scientific method that we use today. Dr. Branson is exactly right. No, he is not. They are not. Only a biblical worldview can logically account for those things necessary for scientific inquiry, such as uniformity in nature and laws of logic. No. Again, well, okay, that's an assertion. It's not backed up by science by any stretch. And again, laws of logic in terms of rhetoric is not used in science. So therefore, I never heard of what is the modus operandi or whatever the fuck PQ and all that bullshit is until recently, because not a rhetorician, not someone who studies logic. And I never use the principles of logic, and I know Lucky Haskins, if he still watches this, my channel will probably get me again on this, is that science doesn't use logic in that way. So modus ponens, sure. Um, laws of logic is used in computer ALU. Oh, okay. Howdy, Maya. Howdy, Turing test. Laws of logic. Yeah, I suppose that's true, but okay. I might need to revise that statement because if computer science is truly a science in that it operates on data driven, testable, then yeah. So obviously there are Boolean functions within coding, logical statements within coding. So thank you. I um, might have to rethink that. We use logical inference all over science. Again, from what I've seen of science, I don't see that. I don't really, I don't really agree with that. I could be wrong. I am actually, unlike some people, I am open to being wrong on this. Um, and it might be a question of semantics of what I consider to be logic may not actually be what logic is. So it is possible, um, quite possible, that I am wrongheaded on this idea of laws of logic are not are inconsistent with the scientific method. So I will say that. I will say that. If we didn't, we would have a collection of data with no way to connect them. Are physical laws logical laws? Because that's how I would connect it. But again, this may be ultimately a semantic argument as to what I consider to be logical laws may not be, it probably isn't what Clive or anyone else might consider to be a logical law, and I very well could be wrong. And so yeah, logic is a branch of mathematics. Mathematics is not science. I know them be fighting words, but that is a hill I will die on. But anyway, getting back to creationists, did the ancient Greeks believe in laws of logic? Yes, I guess. Um, let's look at that for a second. So Aristotle believed that objects at rest stay at rest unless acted upon by an impetus, force. But objects in motion ultimately come to rest. He logically, well, basically observationally, and then I guess logically, came to the conclusion that the natural state of all things is rest. That is not true. Um, and science bore that out. So, did ancient Greeks believe in laws of logic? Yes, I would agree with that statement. Were their laws? Did their laws of logic lead to accurate predictions, conclusions? No, not all the time. Most of the time, no. So, but this next sentence just gets me. So the Greeks were borrowing from the biblical worldview without acknowledging this, of course. Right. Okay. Because they were using logic, they had to have been using the biblical worldview, which, if I have to remind you, is that the universe was created by a divine creator. I could be wrong in this as well, but I don't believe that the ancient Greeks believed or were monotheistic to the point that they believed a single entity created the universe. That is the center of the biblical worldview. Um, it's been a very long time since I read anything about Greek myths, but I believe there was a male and female component to the creation of the universe. So, not a biblical worldview. Although they denied the biblical God with their lips, they were relying upon the biblical God with their actions. Oh, okay. So their achievements, their methodologies, their intellect, that wasn't really theirs. It was God's. They just, they were using God without knowing it. What the fuck? Um, that's not how that works. You can't just say, "Oh, all right, well, um, you are doing this, so obviously the methods that you're doing they're wrong because I don't know. I suck at analogies. Thank you, Maya. I appreciate that comment. Um, so yeah, to me that's an extremely arrogant statement in that you are basically discounting, you're invalidating the logical methods that Aristotle used to write his book of physics. You are invalidating all of that and basically saying no, he was using God. He was using God's way. Um, this behavioral inconsistency is quite common in our modern world too. Okay, just like the Greeks, many scientists today rely upon the truth of the Bible while simultaneously verbally denying the truth. Citation fucking needed. Where does? Oh, I'm sorry, I figured it out. I've been using the Bible biblical worldview all this time. I just don't admit it as such. Fuck off. Just fuck off. Um, no. I see. This fun thing is, I don't deny the truth of the Bible, insofar as it is a moral work, as in the fact that I believe that it is the moral truth. Now, that is if you disagree with that, that is an entirely different conversation, which I would be willing to have. But it is not the scientific it is not the scientific proof. It is not the scientific truth. Um, let's see. Math is perhaps the single best thing we ever discovered slash invented. Yeah, I might go with that. I might go with that. Although sliced bread is still pretty cool. Um, John Lennox. I don't know who John Lennox is. Um, yeah. Okay. All right. Again, I might be wrong on that. Again, some semantics. How did the ancient Greeks know about the biblical God that they relied on? Blah blah blah. The answer is Romans. Okay, let's see what that says. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them because God has shown it to them. So, if I am interpreting that biblical verse, hold on. How did the Greeks know about the biblical God? Um, because God. Oh, okay. Because God showed it to them, but they must be ungodly because they rejected it. When did the Greeks suppress the truth? They didn't. Again, I my knowledge of when the Bible was written, when the books of the Bible were written, were they written like what had been written of the current Bible around 300 BC? Which of the books of the Bible had been created by 300 BC? Because those are the only books that they would have known about to have a biblical worldview. As far as I know, they didn't denounce any of that because, as far as I know, they didn't know about it. So yeah, ancient Greeks obviously set up NASA. Obviously. Um, God revealed himself, but because people have a sinful nature, they are inclined to suppress our knowledge of God. Yes, of course, because that's what science does. Science suppresses the knowledge of God. We get together at the Astronomical Society or the every every AAS meeting, there is a they call it there is a group that gets together simply. You got heliophysics over here, they have talks. You've got cosmology over here, they have talks. And then you have suppression of God. And that's all the talks are, is the scientists develop new and inventive ways to suppress God's. Fuck off. Fuck off. No, that doesn't happen. And if you're going to tell me that it happens on a subconscious level, bet you can guess what I'm going to tell you to do. Yeah, that. Because again, that is, you are arrogantly presuming that you know my mind better than I do. You are presuming that that you're invalidating my ability to come to rational thought or to have rational thought and critical thinking. So the argument is not that people must profess a belief in the Bible in order to do science. The argument is that the Bible must be true in order for anyone to do science. Citation needed. That is an assertion that you are making. I mean, again, ultimately, you can say that at the top of the stream, I was making assertions that science has to be testable, so that science is not governed by a worldview and all that. So again, I mean that is ultimately, I think, where we're at loggerheads, and it is equally valid to say that as I am dismissing your argument that the Bible must be true in order for someone to do science, you can easily dismiss my argument that no, science can only be done in a worldview. Granted, you would be dismissing how science has been done for the last at least 100, if not 200 years, because that is not how it was done, unless, again, you make this arrogant presumption that everyone who is doing science that you agree with is using is stating or assuming that the Bible is true, which is, yeah. What? All right. So, to bring this around, to end this out, of course, Answers in Genesis has a kids page. Of course it does. I mean, I can't really knock it. NASA has their own web page for kids, all that sort of stuff. So I was like, hey, what sorts of things are on here? I haven't looked at the videos yet because honestly, I just couldn't. I can only go so far with this, but I decided to click on this, which is, I can't remember, answers. I think it was under answers. When were angels created? Um, la 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 la. All of this boils down to, we don't know. We know that they had to be have been created during the Garden of Eden, which again is a misunderstanding. Again, biblical consensus is that Satan with a big S is not actually the snake. The snake is Satan with a small s, meaning advocate. It is an entity, angel or not, that was created to challenge God. He is the devil's advocate. He is there to push the limits of things. Kind of think of him as God's debugger. In that, God puts forward the system, and so he's there to see if he can break it. But that's not Satan with a big S. Satan with a big S is Lucifer, Morning Star, glowing horns and all that kind of business. He is already evil. Even I have a problem with this. Why did Yeah, this gets into the notion of trying to understand God's nature, but why did God create Satan and have him be evil? I don't know, because particularly since there is a theological argument states that angels do not have free will. So you cannot argue that Satan chose to rebel, that it was in Satan's nature to rebel, which means that God created something evil. So, yeah, these are the challenges that I have within my own faith. These are my crises of faith, as it were, is to try to explain where Lucifer comes from or the fall. But honestly, all of that is not within the Bible. a lot of that is taken from rabbinical teachings, from the Talmud, from my understanding. So, yeah, I don't know. Ultimately, this page answering the question of when were angels created, eh, beats us. We don't know. So go with that, kids. Then I went to science experiments, and I was like, all right, let's see what we got here. This all looks pretty innocuous. Sea salts and density. I'm assuming this is Archimedes' principle. How to make clay. I don't know what scientific point that's trying to make. Milk it. Come up with a different term. Name that something else. No, no. Um, we learn how to make plastic from plants, oil, coal, and even milk. Okay. I didn't know you can make plastic from milk. Learn something every day. GPS. But I decided because um, magnets, how do they work? Which one did I go with? There it is. This is the one that struck my attention the most. Sun powered s'mores oven. Like, I've never heard of a solar powered s'more oven. And to me, that's of vital importance. Fuck milk. Give me s'mores. How can I make s'mores without electricity? And yeah, this is actually, I did not know this. This is actually pretty cool. I don't know. Maybe I will try this experiment at some point. Um, I do eat a lot of pizza, so I definitely can get my hands on a pizza box. I got aluminum foil. I got plastic wrap. Actually, the only thing I really don't have out of this list are the s'mores ingredients. But yeah, maybe I'll try this, see what happens. But I'm like, this is kind of cool. I will give it to Answers in Genesis this one time. This is actually pretty cool. I like it. So howdy, Judy. Oh, Judy is here. So anyway, that is not Lucifer, it's JD Vance. Oh, a friend of mine's shared another meme with me. Um, it was fuck Mary Kill, and it was Couch, his wife, and the Pope. I just cannot. I just cannot deal with that. Anyway. You came from a steak I cannot tell you the last time I had steak. But given my cholesterol, I probably should never have steak again. But who knows? Oh, that sounds delightful. Um. Anyway, so that's basically it for now. I will be returning to Answers in Genesis in the future. I will be basically, it'll become a dead horse. That's essentially the direction I'm going to take in terms of my science skepticism content, is looking at Answers in Genesis and rebutting their claims. Because, yeah, their basic understanding of science is flawed. And so, therefore, because they don't understand science or what science actually is, any claims they make to be scientific are are logically wrong. Um, and again, I find this to be a much more pressing issue because than flat Earth. Not because flat Earth is dead. I was just in a Discord conversation. Well, I was listening to a Discord conversation that definitively shows that flat Earth is still very much alive. Um, it may be direction. I'm wondering whether or not it might be directionless for a while, because Patricia Steer, Robbie Robertson, or whatever the fuck that guy's name is, Jake on Plane. All of these prominent names within flat Earth are in fact jumping ship. I don't know if they are no longer flat earthers, like what Flatzoid is trying to pull, in that he is now just going to go to biblical cosmology and not advocate for flat Earth at all. So I don't know what if they have accepted that the Earth is a globe or not, but they certainly have left the stage. So in that sense, you could say that flat Earth is dying. So I wonder if that's actually going to be the case, that flat Earth is going to lose its momentum because it does not have charismatic leaders. But in that sense, but flat Earth isn't going to die. It's just going to not be direct. It doesn't will not have uh, it will not be prominent out there. You have to actually go look for it. What that would mean is that we got to wait that a charismatic leader could, in fact, rise again once there's enough distance from TFE. Um, because as we know from the internet's attention span isn't very large. When TFE becomes the distance becomes long enough, they can more easily deny that it existed or say it's fake. So I'm curious from a sociological point of view where flat Earth is going. But the reason why I do not consider flat Earth to be of or of a moral prerogative or an ethical prerogative is because creationism is tied to evangelical Christianity, and that there are certain very problematic, um, reprehensible viewpoints within evangelical Christianity. And within the United States, evangelical Christianity has gained tremendous political power. Um, it is alleged, I haven't confirmed this, but it is alleged that the third person in line for the presidency, the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, is a young Earth creationist. He believes that the universe is 10,000 years old. So this is deeply problematic. And I think this needs to be addressed more vehemently than others. So I kudos to Professor Dave. He basically, he from my cursory look at his constant content, he started out with flat Earth and then quickly went into creationism, evolution, and all that, and basically has it is now in his epic battle against James Tour. I don't know how that's going to go, but no, again, no. The only person at this point that I can think of that could conceivably take up the reins is Whitsitt. But I don't know what he's been up to lately. I haven't really been keeping track of him. So that's the only contender that I have. Nathan Oakley and QE are too toxic and not motivated enough to leave their subterranean layers in order to make themselves more known. So yeah, as far as I know, it's all they've got at this point. Maybe someone from the Aether community will rise up. I think that's what Alan is attempting to do, but who knows? But yeah, so creationism, young Earth creationism, that has real world implications because one of the things, thankfully, that Trump's administration has yet to focus on, but I anticipate they will in a year or so, or maybe even sooner, is right now they're dismantling the scientific, they're dismantling the scientific framework of this country. Basically, they're trying to massively underfund NASA. They have made drastic reduction in funding for the NIH, eliminating entire fields of study. So what is it? Well, they fired the Ebola people. They brought them back. Oh yeah, food testing. That's right. Apparently, there's not going to be any food testing anymore. Sleep tight, for those of you Americans out there. So yes, the Trump administration is already dismantling the mechanism via which scientific misinformation, can be fought. So the next step would be, logically, to promote scientific miscommunication. We kind of already see that with RFK. Fuck RFK. Damn it. The more I learn about what he's doing, the more I really, really want to kick him in the nuts repeatedly. Um, you know, but in specific, he is rejecting the scientific consensus and essentially defunding um, autism research that will be fruitful. He is making the claim without any substantial evidence, or at least not without any substantial evidence that is of any um, scientific merit that hasn't been thoroughly discredited. Uh, he's putting forth the idea that autism is due to environmental factors. That is not what current science tells us. Current science is pointing towards a genetic origin. Therefore, more funding needs to be directed towards understanding its genetic origin. But that's not what he's going to do. He is, I don't know how much of it is reduced, but I imagine he has cut genetic funding for autism by a significant amount, if not completely. And he's going to redirect those funds to, apparently by September, we are going to know, we are going to understand the environmental factors that cause autism. And so then he can start getting rid of them. Yeah, good luck with that. Good luck with that. Even if you were on the right track, making the claim that we're going to understand this disorder that has been around for, I don't know, decades by September. NASA would like a word about making promises on deadlines that you were not going to keep at all. So, without food testing, they won't be able to export agricultural products. Well, given the tariffs that he's put forward, I don't think any country can afford our agricultural products at this point, which means that the government is going to increase the subsidies to American farmers. That's an entirely different topic. But getting back to this is that Trump administration is currently dismantling the scientific mechanism by which misinformation can be combated at the national level from a government standpoint. The next step would be to push misinformation or pseudoscience. As I just mentioned, RFK is doing that with autism. He is kind of doing that with vaccines, while he is still giving lip service to the idea that vaccines are the efficacy of vaccines. He is still saying this is a personal choice. From a ethical standpoint, it is not. Not that being unvaccinated for no other reason that you don't want to be vaccinated is a danger to society as a whole. You are allowing a virus, even if you do not well, you're allowing a virus to perpetuate in existence. This is why we now have measles everywhere. I don't know if I would call it an epidemic, but again, I kind of get persnickety in terms of the meaning of that word, or at least the connotation of that word. But we definitely see measles a lot more than we did before in a lot of different areas. And lo and behold, measles vaccinations are down. Who would have thought? Less vaccinations, more disease. No idea how that correlation came into existence. It's got to be 5G. It's got to be 5G. It's not vaccines, it's 5G. So after autism, after vaccines, what's next? Creationism. When in the 90s, there was a big push to have creationism taught in schools. With this, the common refrain was students need to hear both sides. They, don't, they're not at the time, they were not advocating that evolution not be taught. They were just advocating that creationism be taught as well as a viable or as a scientific theory on the same footing as evolutionary biology. It gained a little bit of traction. I believe there were some textbooks that got altered, basically, I think to the point of stating that evolution is not is not confirmed or whatever, and that creationism is an option. Um, I think that was done in Georgia of all places, and I think in Texas. But and yeah, that gave rise to a whole lot of homeschooling. But my fear is, and I don't think it's a illegitimate fear, is that um, you're going to see a push by the government to start teaching, at the very minimum, teaching evolution to students, to primary and secondary education level students, that or that creation is a viable scientific option as to where humanity came from. I would also imagine that in certain municipalities, that they will go even further and basically outlaw the teachings of evolutionary biology. They will only teach creationism. So this idea that flat Earth could ever be part of the academic curricula, that's never going to happen. Um, I don't even think if evangelicals win over everyone somehow, God, mm, that flat Earth is ever going to be taught in schools. But creationism, I think that's a real possibility, particularly since he is again dismantling the Department of Education. I'm sorry, but education is not a state right. 2 plus 2 equals 5, or 2 plus 2 equals 4 in every state of the union. It does not equal 5 in Florida, but 4 in Georgia. This is not a states' rights issue. These sorts of things, there are facts that we all should agree on. These should be decided at the national level, and that curricula should be propagated down to the states. But because the Department of Education is getting axed, and the push is to have the curricula developed at the state level or even the county level, then it's going to be the wild fucking west, in that who knows what is going to be taught in certain areas. And this is going to have very real consequences, because evangelicals are found in primarily rural environments, environments that education is not highly prioritized. And there is a clear mark or clear correlation between the quality of someone's education and the their economic growth. Rural communities stay impoverished. One of the reasons why rural communities stay impoverished is because their quality of education sucks. And now there is this possibility in my mind that not only is the quality of education going to suck, but you're going to double down and teach them the wrong shit. So, and that's just going to make things even worse. So, if you care about people, if you care about the well being of people, then you need to not let that happen. Creationism cannot be taught in schools because it is not supported by science. It is supported by a certain biblical interpretation of uh, certain interpretation of the Bible. And as far as I'm aware, the First Amendment is pretty clear as to the freedom of having different religious viewpoints. And so forcing creationism on the general public, to me, is a clear violation of the First Amendment, because you are bringing, as we saw with Answers in Genesis, they are open about the fact that you have to have God, the Christian God, in order to do science. So you must bring the Christian God into schools and teach that as fact to students, which is not going to go over well with parents of Jewish students. It's not going to go over well with parents of, well, any religion, Islam, Baha'i, Hindu, the Hinduism, any of them. They're all going to reject that idea, and they should, and they have the right to, because of the First Amendment to the United States. Um, in this country, just I know I'm verging into politics, but which fine, I ramble. is that it strikes me that, again, as we see with flat Earth, as we see with young Earth creationists, they will only accept that which confirms their worldview. I just saw recently a meme where you have a large white woman uh, basically pressing down on a immigrant child and screaming, "All lives matter. You need to get the fuck out of my country." But immigrants need to get the hell out of it. So all lives matter except for brown people. Okay. So all lives don't matter. Only white lives matter. Or or at least or lives that are from that are not illegal immigrants. So illegal immigrants, those lives don't matter. So really what it boils down to is American lives matter. Everyone else can go fuck themselves, which is deeply problematic. But really, let's be real. When anyone says all lives matter, what they're really saying is white lives matter. Brown people, no. Whatever. Um, so again, it's the rejection, it's the lip service to, oh, this is scientific. Yet putting forward ideas that are clearly not scientific, that are contrary to what science is. All lives matter, but everyone should be entitled to freedom of speech unless it criticizes the current narrative. So so X is America's town hall where everything goes, apparently even porn, and but and so everyone should have be able to speak their mind, except for journalists who are critical of Elon Musk. They don't get the freedom of speech because reasons. Again, it's going contrary to Elon's worldview that Elon is the shit and that everything he does is golden. So therefore, he has to reject it. Same thing with the Trump administration. The fact that he has removed the AP, I don't know if they gotten back into the press pool, but the fact that he was able to remove the AP from his press pool, and then he has the gall, or anyone in his administration has the fucking gall to say that we support the First Amendment. You're talking out of your ass. You do not support the First Amendment, because if you did, you would not support the suppression of a press agency. So, and because you just simply disagree with how they actually, wasn't it he got rid of them because they refused to call the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America? What the living fuck? Um, no, you certainly cannot you cannot infringe upon the right of the press because of something as trivial as that. It's something as inanely patriotic as that, or nationalistic as that. So this is becoming more and more prevalent in this country. Again, maybe I'm being a boomer and being like, back in my day we didn't have these problems, but I don't think so. I mean, I think there are real differences between what's happening now and what's happening um, back when I was growing up. I don't remember a time when uh, people were uh, people were arrested. That immigration arrested people in plain clothes and would not fully identify themselves or explain why to even the person's lawyer why they were being arrested, why they're being detained and um, sent off. I don't remember a time when we had mass deportations such that we were not, well, no, let me rephrase that. I do not remember a time when we had mass deportations and we put these people in fucking prisons. Usually, my understanding was we just sent them back to their home countries and said, good luck. Hopefully, no one kills you. Now we're sending them to literal prison in someone else's country. What the absolute fuck? Like, um, I just, I, so yes, you're correct. This is essentially what This is this is how fascism starts. Again, I won't say that. I won't go so far as to say that Trump is a fascist. I won't go so far as to say that Trump administration is a fascist administration because I want that word to have meaning. Um, we are not living. We are certainly not living in Hitler's Germany. We are not living in Franco's Spain. We are not living in Mussolini's Italy. We do have fundamental rights. We still do have fundamental rights. We still do have some semblance of rule of law. Now, that we are not going in the right direction, in my opinion. In my opinion, we. Oh yes, Stalin would be. No, no, actually, no. Stalin would not be proud because Stalin didn't deport the people he hated. He sent them to Siberia. He was at least um, he was at least principled enough to keep them in his own country and put them into gulags out in Siberia. We don't even have that. And actually, I believe that's one of the justifications for why we are deporting them to El Salvador is because we don't have the gulags to stick them in. Stalin would have built the gulags or did build the gulag. So Trump is just being a lazy fascist or a lazy communist, however you want to look at it. Um, Lazy authoritarian at the very least. But anyway, where was I going to? Where was I going with this? Um, Caroline Levitt is that the blonde chick that I know that narrows it down in the Trump administration. Um, but is that the woman he appointed to be his spiritual advisor or whatever the leader? Oh my God, don't get. I'm probably going to do a stream on that woman because yeah, I have a few things to say about it from a Christian nature. But anyway, yes, this is what I was going to go. I'm not going to, I do not think that we are living in a fascist state. I think we are headed in that direction if things do not change. Certainly. And that is why we need to speak out. The politic, I don't know. I need to, she isn't the press secretary, the one woman I'm thinking of. Oh, Caroline Levitt is the press secretary. Ah, okay. Yeah. Okay. I I know the answer to this question, but why this isn't talked about more in public spaces, I don't know. Again, I don't like using the other N word. I don't like claiming that people are Nazis because Nazis are evil. And to claim that someone is a Nazi because you disagree with them politically and you believe they have fascist bendings dilutes the power of that word. It dilutes the power of of the atrocities that Nazi Germany did upon on the people of the world, particularly Jews. I do not like when people throw that word around. But the people in the women in his administration, are they exclusively blondes? White blonde women? How is that not transparent? So transparently Aryan? Can he not hire? Of course, he's not going to hire a person of color. Let's not delude ourselves with that. But he can't even hire a brunette. Like, um, I mean, I think there's a secretary of there's a one of his secretaries is oh yeah, there's Tulsi Gabbard. She's a brunette, although she's looking more rogue like because she's got that white streak in her hair. Um, so so there might be some cabinet members, some women members in cabinet, but the face of the Trump administration, they're all white women. Like, why is this not talked about more? Um, because yeah, nothing strikes me as Aryan as having blonde women all over the place. Fox News, aside from Janine Shapiro, um, I cannot think of another a female Fox host that isn't blonde. I I could not name one, or could not. recognize one as a Fox contributor. Janine Shapiro is or Shapiro, however you pronounce her name. Um, she is she is the only brunette on that fucking only brunette woman on that channel. How is this? I don't know. Anyway, um, do camps have to be within your own borders to count? We're still using them. Yes. We have. Again, I don't like the use of the word concentration camp because, again, it may be a matter of semantics, and I may be being hyper critical on it. I would refer to those as internment camps because, to me, one of the necessities of a concentration camp is to burn bodies or to gas people. Again, concentration camps, we have to remember that concentration camps were not just simply work camps. They were a part of the final solution. Jews were sent there to die. They were not sent there to subjugate them. They were not sent there to separate them. This is why they're called gulag, or why, in my opinion, they're called gulags in the Soviet Union, because he didn't kill them there. He just left them to die in a way. Admittedly, there are estimates that Stalin actually killed far more people than Hitler ever did, but they were his own people, so we don't give a shit. Yes, okay. Well, that's the thing is, I would argue that this no, that's not the sole purpose for concentration camps, but it was the primary purpose, was to kill them. Getting work out of them was just a bonus. So so to me, we need to be very careful about about terms, because we cannot understate the atrocity of the Holocaust. That has not been replicated. Certainly, we are nowhere even close to replicating that level of evil in this country. Do I think for the first time in my life that that sort of evil could happen within the United States? Yes. Do I think we're going in that direction? I don't know. I do know we are becoming more authoritarian. But again, words matter. And words like Nazi, concentration camps, they matter. Fascism, they matter. And I think in this country, when we have dialogues, we too often throw those words around without understanding. By doing so, we are normalizing those terms, and that we are diminishing the suffering that occurred within the physical and emotional suffering that occurred within truly fascist states, and the horrific nature of people within Nazi controlled territories. So, yeah. Yeah, okay. Fair. But at this point, if you, from my own study of that time period, they're basically they're commonly called concentration camps, not, and occasionally death camp would be synonymous with that. But um, um, yeah. So, in terms of, I was going to mention this when you were talking about internment camps, or the rise of camps, is we've been doing this shit forever, particularly with Native Americans. What we've done with the Native Americans is horrific, and again, going way off topic. So we have at least broached the subject of reparations to the African American community because of the horrors of slavery. We have at least begun discussions of that. We have We have now critical race theory, which talks about, from my understanding, essentially the implications within the legal system and within government that is underpinned by uh, systemic racism. Basically, how systemic racism has affected government and economic policies. That's my interpretation of what CRT is. So apologies if I'm ignorant and I'm getting that wrong. I do know that CRT is often misrepresented, but we haven't even begun to discuss that within the Native American community. We are just ignoring that part of our history, that horrendous part of our history of what we did to the Native American community. We stole their lands, we massacred them. So, and we are effectively we put them in camps. We put them on reservations. Granted, they can leave the reservation. They don't have to stay there. So it's not a camp or in that sense. But at the time, and actually that's definitely what's going on now, but at the time, I don't even know if that was the case. I believe it could have been that Native Americans had to go to the reservation. They couldn't get off of it. I don't know. But at the very least, they were subjugated into a small portion of the United States, typically portions of the United States that were not really sustainable from an agricultural point of view. So we subjugated them and we forced them into prolonged poverty and prolonged suffering. We haven't even begun to address that in any real way whatsoever. So this country has done some evil shit. And what I think makes America great is that we have, in a lot of areas, attempted to rectify the evil shit that we've done. We have not done a very good job in terms um, of slavery. We have not really addressed that, in my opinion, adequately well, and we have not addressed that with Native Americans. And now we are perpetrating another evil. We are marginalizing, we are oppressing the marginalized group of illegal immigrants, and real Americans are getting wrapped up in this. You know, again, I'm just been told, but I have not looked into it. But I've been told that there was an 8-year-old child with cancer who was a natural born citizen. She was deported. How is that even possible? How is that possible? Um, and how is that morally justified? If we are supposedly a Christian country, how the fuck is any of that supposed to be justified? Yeah, and I figured Conclave um, would spike, and it's my brother Vic has told me that it's actually a very good movie. And funny enough, people, I think it was Rafe Fiennes and one of the other actors in it were amazed on how well Stanley Tucci is received in Italy. He is apparently a superstar in Italy, which I get. He is a sexy, sexy man. Um, I mean, yeah, in this way, this is the reason why I'm not Catholic anymore, is because the Catholic Church has perpetuated significant moral evil and has doing nothing to atone for it. And considering that Catholics are all about atonement, that sort of behavior, I can't endorse that or be a part of an organization that does such a thing. Now, in terms of America, you know, I one, it's really not. I mean, yes, I could move. I could become an expatriate. I could just up and move to Mexico or up and move to Canada or whoever will take me. My quality of life will greatly suffer for it. And yeah, I am not at that stage where I'm willing to do that. Now, if I just happen upon a position that is equivalent to what I'm doing now in another country, you bet your ass I'm going to seriously consider it. Because most of my relationships, if not all of my relationships at this point, are long distance anyway. I mean, shit, most of you in the chat are not are across the pond. Um, um, I mean, it's not going to change that very much, but yeah, I because of what's happening in the United States, I would, if given an opportunity to leave, I would sure as shit take it, or at least really, really think about it. Don't even want to visit the U.S. As it, Judy, I understand, and I was talking to Ro about this. She doesn't want to come over to the United States either because she's afraid of being detained. And as it happened, an Irish woman was, or Irish American woman was detained for that reason. Uh, so yeah, her paranoia as her concern was justified. Where was this? Maya said something that I like. I'm a former Catholic too, I think. Yes. So Maya, that is true. If you are confirmed Catholic, regardless of what you have to say on the matter, you are always Catholic until you get excommunicated. So technically speaking, we're still followers of Cathol, even if we don't practice it. Yeah, Ro, I thought you had U.S. citizenship too. Um, yeah, I mean, again, it's the poem or whatever, and I should know it, but my memory sucks. Is first they came for um, these people, and I said nothing. Then they came for these people, and I said nothing. Um, they or Hitler's Germany did target the marginalized first, and then kept going. And and that is one of the reasons why I think that I admit we are going towards a fascist state. We are where I can see that we could become fascist at some point because they're targeting minorities and they're already making noises about going further, like Trump's off the cuff remark of deporting any criminal or criminals that he deems heinous enough that they no longer deserve to be Americans anymore. Their prisoners are another marginalized group. Better for worse, prisoners are, they, I think, technically have no rights, so they are marginalized, and so he is going after that group. He might go after that group. So I think when we look at the United States, and when people start talking about the country being fascist, there are definite signs that we are heading in that direction, and it scares the fuck out of me. Um, European private laws was a good incentive to write to the Catholic Church to have any, if not any, of my details deleted from their records, and they complied. Oh, okay. Um, Private laws. I didn't know if you. I wonder if I could do that. I don't know if I care enough to do that, to be honest with you. I hate the church, but whether or not they consider me to be a part of it, I have only a set amount of fucks that I can give, and I think that's not enough. That doesn't really fall on that list. Um, and howdy, Dora. Where was I going? I think I'm gonna start tapering off because I need to concentrate on my day job, specifically trying to get this Mason Science Center, or at least the outreach portion of the Mason Science Center, really off the ground. One of the things that I'm doing now is effectively putting together a more than a mission, basically a prospectus. Basically, this is what we do for an outreach so that we can send that to corporate sponsors or whoever and say, hey, this is what we do. This is what we want to do. If you like it, please give us money so that we can continue to do it and grow with it. So that's one of the things that's been on my plate lately, is trying to do that and other sort of administrative shit. The Freemason Science Center. Oh, I'm sorry. I may have misspoken. Mason Space Center. So, so yeah, Freemason Space Center. Basically sending Freemasons to the moon. That's what we're all about here at GMU. All right. So yeah, I'm going to uh sign off, and thank you all for being here today and for watching, particularly those who have been here all the entire time. If you missed it, particularly for coming in now, the first couple hours were actually dealing with science, and particularly answers in Genesis. I went through couple six of their websites, basically saying the exact same thing over and over again about what science is, and I provided my thoughts as to why they are completely and utterly wrong in those assertions that they made. Moved into politics because, again, I want to stress that unlike other forms of science miscommunication, most other forms of science communication, such as flat Earth, this has real world implications to cause suffering because of the attachments or uh, the fact that young Earth creationists are often tied to evangelicals. And yes, Peter, if you're watching this, I understand that you are not someone who is hateful, um, but you are, in my opinion, in my experience, you are the exception to the rule. So that is why I urge. That is why I'm doing this. Why I am speaking out about young Earth creationism. I urge other debunkers to switch gears and start talking about it as well, and start challenging the claims that these folks are making. Because, yeah, we need to get loud. And I don't, this is how, when it comes to this country, Americans, when it comes to this country and fighting the things that I think are desperately wrong with it and getting worse, this is my niche. This is how I can get loud. Um, there are other things that I want to do, but that's a different topic entirely. Anyway, thank you all for being here. And I am Professor Parks, PhD. I make content on astronomy, science skepticism, and mental health. If you like that sort of thing, please hit that like button, share, subscribe, do all that kind of good stuff. If you would like to support the observatory, as it's been saying down here, please consider becoming a Patreon of mine. All proceeds from Patreon go to improvements of the observatory. If you would like to help me and learn more about the Landau mission and specifics of what I do here at the observatory, please consider becoming a channel member. I am going to start ramping up videos that are members only um, at once the semester is over and I have more time to do it. So, Witcher 3, excellent, excellent game. Right now, I'm obsessed with Deus Ex, Man Divided. But anyway, all right. With that, I will see you all later. Peace out and clear skies.